insert that typical Seinfeld theme you would usually hear, I would say. um, Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of Macy's Parade in Pop Culture. Today, we are continuing our second half of the NBC primetime Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade related episodes, to be precise. As specifically, we are going into our favorite comedian, Jerry Seinfeld, specifically the 94th episode of the entire show and the 8th episode of the 6th season, The Mom and Pop Store, that aired on the same day as the Friends episode, the one where Underdog got away, which I talked about in the last episode, November 17th, 1994. Yep, both of these episodes did air on the exact same day, back to back. So yeah, both NBC shows had Macy's Parade episodes aired on the same day. That is back to back. That is just wow. So now, like with Friends, I am not really much familiar with Seinfeld, although it was a Franklin show that aired during my early years of childhood. And I know specifically the show ran from 1989 specifically all the way to 1999. But it had been kind of a relevant program through Fox 56, the local Fox station channel here in central Pennsylvania and northeastern. And my dad usually would play it, an episode on Seinfeld when it was on the air, and it was commonly through our very small kitchen television. Yeah, there was a little kitchen television we had, and that was one of the most notable shows that I know that aired through that television. I know there was the television in the living room, but we did once had in our life had a television in the kitchen. I'm guessing there might be some houses that still do to this day, but not as we used to. But obviously, it was just then a familiar thing, because obviously the most notable thing about every episode on Seinfeld is the opening and ending credits sketch from, like, a stand-up bit from Jerry Seinfeld himself. Now, for this episode, it has a lot of convolution going on with all the three characters of Jerry's friends, and he is always in the center of it and causing something to screw up with all the other four characters. Well, not much with one, but mainly the other. But the big scenario is that Tim Whatley is hosting a Thanksgiving party, and obviously his friends Elaine, Cosmo, and Jason were all invited, but not Jerry for some reason. I really don't know much about that character specifically, other than I didn't realize he was actually played by Bryan Cranston after looking that up. That kind of surprised me. But Jerry obviously kind of has a bit of a convolution going on with his other three friends. But obviously his main deal is why was he not invited to the party? And his ex-girlfriend and later friend Elaine, I don't know if they were exes at the very beginning of the show, so I'm not really sure. She got the invitation, and apparently her boss, I think that's what her boss is, Mr. Pitt, there was a bit of a radio contest going on to name a big classical musical piece of song, and if whoever wins the contest gets to be a balloon handler for the Woody Woodpecker balloon. And Mr. Pitt, who had never had the opportunity to do that, as that was something his parents had forbidden him to do, or something that was completely against, that was kind of censored him throughout his life, especially his childhood, was to hold a balloon in the Macy's parade, or even seeing the parade in general. And hearing about this and finding that Elaine knows a lot about pieces of classical music, the result is, of course, that she won the contest, but she had to get the VIP tickets, or specifically those to a big hall somewhere in a restaurant. I forget what it was called, but especially she had to wait until all the music in that restaurant was done playing, and she completely can't really hear anything, almost like she went full on deaf for the rest of the episode or stuff like that. Even bringing in this Empire State Building trophy she brought. I don't know where that came from. And then you have Jerry's friend Jason Alexander, who bought a car that is supposedly potentially previously owned by Join Voight. Yes, the Join Voight specifically, and he actually does appear in this episode for a brief cameo. And the biggest thing that we were trying to convince if it was the real him or not because of the car, but a chewed up pencil that could potentially be coming from his teeth. And that would later on, Cosmo would find John Voight randomly. He was doing an investigation on his plot of the story, finding him and got bit by him and tried to convince him, and then things did not turn out the way it was. But John Voight, the real John Voight, does make an appearance in this episode. And then, of course, you have the main title, The Mom and the Pop Store, where Cosmo actual mom and the pop store, which is kind of like a shoe place store, is almost about to go out of business. And he asked Jerry if he had any shoes, and by the kind of stupidity of Cosmo, I think, he took all of Jerry's shoes except for a pair of cowboy boots that Jerry does not like in general. Although he did have another pair, but Jason did not want Jerry to have the pair he wore on supposedly John Voight's car because he stepped on some gum on the way to the car. And then, of course, obviously Cosmo had been having some series of nosebleeds throughout the entire episode and looked up a couple of wires and finding out that the store is not in good condition even though they were planning to close it. So they got an electrician and demanded that they either had to pay it or they would have to leave in general. And of course, things get more complicated when they took off all of Jerry's shoes, and it, of course, leads to the bigger conclusion at the end of the episode. Then, of course, you have Jerry being the center of all of this. Basically, he led Cosmo to get all of his shoes without realizing it. He steps on a piece of gum and Jason would not allow him to go into John Voight's car. He goes back, finds they were all gone, and the only thing he has left is a pair of cowboy boots. A massive argument between him and Jason. Jason kicks Jerry out of the car, falls down on the sidewalk, and almost feels like he has a massive tooth pain or something like that. Sneakily coming a supposed party crasher at Tim Watley's party. I don't know the real reason why he was uninvited. I'm guessing there might have been some sort of conflict they had in a previous season or something like that. I don't know much about it since I'm watching the show out of context. Well, specifically just with watching this episode alone. And obviously with the trophy that Elaine brought, she put it on a window, and Jerry been trying to find someone who can be like a dentist or something like that. And so he knocks the trophy down on 77th Street, causing somewhat of the Woody Woodpecker balloon to be partially inflated. And then the following morning, he finds out where the shoes are going through, somewhere in New Jersey, and he and Cosmo take a bus, which I don't even think city buses don't even run on Thanksgiving. I'm not sure in New York City or New Jersey, but I know in my area it doesn't. While Cosmo nosebleeds on the way. What a Thanksgiving episode it is. Well, that's one of the biggest things. It doesn't really have much of a Thanksgiving theme, unlike the Friends episode in the last episode we just talked about. So that's one thing. It kind of doesn't really go on to anything about Thanksgiving specifically. It doesn't really mention a lot about Macy specifically, like anything related to the store or anything like that. It's just that it was just a party right next to the balloon inflation area. Now, I thought, out of context, like when I heard about this episode, I thought with the filming scenes and with Woody Woodpecker being deflated, I thought it was they were doing it somewhere like in the nighttime, and like I was thinking, wait, is the parade going on at night? That's not that common. But after seeing this episode, no, it's just the balloon inflation, which it does take place at night. Although you do get footages from the 1992 and 1993 parade of Woody Woodpecker in the footages. I don't know, I think also 92, the balloon inflation pics, I'm pretty sure they were. If I remembered correctly, I believe they were the 92 balloon inflation. So, I'm guessing based on the episode, you would think it would be 93 because obviously it was a very windy day. But it's just like, it's very odd. Especially since 1994 was the passing of Woody Woodpecker's creator Walter Lantz. And because obviously when you look at all of Woody's appearances those 3 years, he doesn't feel like he looked deflated. Like, the only year that only made the most sense was his debut year in 1982. No, yeah, 1982. So if it was like, if the show did set place in 1982, it would have made a lot of sense. And like using footages of the 1982 parade, but I don't know when the premise of the show takes place though. I think it's still in the 90s because people are still wearing casual outfits, of course. Well, 90s casual outfits, of course. And with Jerry popping the balloon, and I'm guessing I believe it was either Tim or Cosmo that says, I think it was Tim or Cosmo, I think it was Tim that says, you're a troublemaker, and I'm guessing with him screwing up some major events in Tim's events, I think, even though most of them are accidents, but some way he screws up an event whenever he's at an event with Tim, and I'm guessing that's the reason why he never invites Jerry, because he can cause some trouble, and he did it again by inflating the Woody Woodpecker balloon, which obviously, if that recreation of the footage of like with Mr. Pitt just tried his best, even though it's odd he's not wearing the Woody Woodpecker outfits that the balloon handlers used to wear, like having these Woody Woodpecker hat lookalikes, like with heads. And specifically they wear, if you know like a little bit about like the 70s, mainly the 80s and the 90s were the more common things until they ended that off in 1997, before they kind of went with a more modern way with just a simple hat and just a big vest around their jumpsuits for the balloon handlers, started in 98 through now. As for the other plots for the episodes, it's just the mom and pop store thing, that's just kind of like doesn't really have a main focus on it. I thought it was like some sort of a place in Macy's, but it doesn't really. It's just some sort of store in the neighborhood that almost could be fraudulent, I'm guessing. And then the whole plot of Join Voight is just, I don't know. Like, yeah, it was interesting to bring him in the episode. I will give it that. But then when, of course, the turned out to be a different Join Voight, spoiler alert, that Jason got the car from, it is kind of ridiculous that he thought it was Join Voight all along, and he kind of really feels ashamed about that. But I think Elaine probably has the best story because it kind of has more of the connection to the Woody Woodpecker plot. One common thing I don't like about, I think this happens in every show, they have the same tune, almost a similar tune to the theme song of the show most of the time, and it does kind of get annoying. I will say it has a better laugh track than the Friends episode, because the Friends laugh track was so loud when I was watching that episode, and this one was a bit more quieter because we got to, like, it wasn't funny. I just felt like some of the jokes were kind of dumb. I really am not a fan of Cosmo. I don't know why he has a better nosebleed. If you want a better Cosmo, it's Cosmo from the Fairly Odd Parents. That's a better funny character than Cosmo from Seinfeld. Otherwise, I just don't know. So I will probably say that I think I prefer the Friends episode over this, even though I really made a massive almost rant on that episode. It just like, it doesn't really have much to do with Thanksgiving. There's barely much about like the parade itself, obviously, and it's just more about like, I feel like the title just seems off to me. I feel like it should have been something else. I feel like that basically kind of wraps up my thoughts on the Seinfeld episode, as well as the double dose of NBC sitcoms related to Thanksgiving with the Macy's Parade. We're going to be going to PBS Kids again in the next episode with 3 kids, with the exception of 3 others, are going to be going to the parade studio to make a float for a certain dog, while 1 kid goes to the U.S. Capitol to meet with a big senator. Well, that means a dog is going to be running for office, so I know that is weird because this episode is being released the day before the infamous day. It was not intentional, but it's just that it's the way how the release schedule of these television episodes are. So let's see how many 100 points are in the stake of the triumph tally for the next episode with a dog as we go fetch.